So welcome everyone. Sorry about that slight technical hitch at the start. We're just waiting for somebody to join us, but we're already now, so sorry you were kept in the waiting room a bit. So hi everybody, welcome to the MA's members meeting for South West England. It's great to have you with us today. My name's Simon Stevens. I'm the head of publications and events at the MA, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. My colleague Geraldine Kendall Adams is also here. She's helping with the facilitation. For the benefit of any blind or partially sighted attendees, I'm a white man in his 50s with glasses and brown hair and also a bit of grey now. We're using Zoom meetings for this event, and it'd be lovely if you're able to keep your cameras on but your mics muted to avoid background noise. Do use the chat function to say hi to the room or let us know where you are and maybe share something exciting or positive that's happening at the moment with your work. We can also take questions via chat. To make life easier for the chair, which is me, please can you put the Q&A at the start of your question, and if applicable, let us know if it's for a specific speaker. If you're tweeting about the event, please use the hashtag MA South West England. And we will be recording today's meeting, and this will be available after the event on our website. If you want a copy of the chat transcript, then please email events@museumsassociation.org and we can send that over. As you can see from the programme, we have breakout discussions scheduled throughout the webinar. These are confidential spaces, these won't be recorded, and people can engage as much and little as they want, and obviously decline to join at all. Before we start the talks, I just want to flag up a few MA events that's coming up. Our next one-day conference is all-inclusive, championing accessible museums. This takes place on the 26th of May, and through publications, case studies and panel discussions, it will explore how museums can become truly inclusive spaces and representational platforms and champion equality at every level. After that, on 30th of June, we have Museum Tech 2022, which is a digital festival for museums. We're excited about this one. This is our first in-person one-day conference since the pandemic. It's happening at the Museum of London, and there'll be a great range of speakers who will look at how understanding and appreciation of digital engagement has shifted in the past few years, and with the COVID pandemic forcing museums to upskill, think creatively and connect with different audiences in new ways. Museum Tech will also consider some of the pressing issues to emerge since then, from things like digital literacy to digital poverty, as well as the environmental and ethical impact of museums' digital outputs. Another event to look forward to is the MA Annual Conference, which is in the fantastic city of Edinburgh this year. It's happening from the 3rd to the 5th of November, and it's open for booking already. Booking's really strong already, which we're really pleased about. It will be a hybrid event, in person and online, like last year's conference, but most of the bookings we have so far are in person, which is really exciting. The themes for conference are workforce and community wellbeing, anti-racism, sustainability, and decolonisation. So information about all our events is available on the MA website, and you'll also find details on the website of our workforce offer, funding programmes, and lots more. So just a quick word about today's programme before we start. It's a bit shorter than our normal members' meetings. Usually we have MA Director Sharon Hill as a speaker, but unfortunately Sharon is away at a museum conference. We're also going to have a bit of online networking at the end, led by our reps, but unfortunately one of our reps can't make it as she has work commitments. Nevertheless, we're looking forward to a really good event with a great range of speakers. And we're going to kick off with a double-hander featuring Gillian Findlay, who is the President of the MA and the Cultural Venues Manager for Museums and Galleries in Edinburgh. And Gillian is joined by Dana Jokey, who is an MA board member and is also the Learning Programme Manager at Aspects Portsmouth. Gillian and Dana are going to be talking about MA campaigns, current strategic priorities, and also highlighting interesting and relevant projects. So over to you, Gillian.
Thank you, Simon, and hello everybody. It's lovely to be here with you online, albeit, but really, really good to have this opportunity to say hello and hopefully catch up with all of you. As Simon has said, I'm currently president of the MA, and I'm the curatorial and engagement manager at Edinburgh Museums and Galleries, which is part of the City of Edinburgh Council. We're getting very excited about hosting conference later on this year, and there's lots of amazing plans in place and potential speakers being lined up. So I really hope to be seeing a lot of you there come November. Last year, when I attended this member meeting, I took the opportunity to say a little bit about my background and my main areas of focus coming into my first term as president. But I was hoping this year it might be more useful to you if we changed that up a little bit and we took the opportunity to focus on other people associated or involved with the MA and other museums locally in your region as well. So we're going to trial this kind of head-to-head, a sort of very informal discursive format. And I'd really like your feedback about whether you find it interesting and useful, and also ideas for who else might be involved, any potential speakers. But I thought it made sense, and I was really pleased to be able to have the opportunity to start off with introducing a fellow trustee of the MA, my colleague here with us today, who I'm sure many of you know, Diana Jockey, who has been with us for just over 3 years, has started her second term as board member of the MA. So Diana, without further ado, I wondered if you could say a little bit about yourself, where you work, your job, what it is you do, and maybe something about what attracted you to all of that in the first place. Why were museums the place that you wanted to be?
Thank you, Gillian, and thank you, everyone. Hi, everybody. My name's Diana, and as mentioned, I'm the Learning Program Manager for Aspects Gallery in Portsmouth. It's a recent role, it's a new role. I've only been in it for 2 weeks, but so far I'm just wrapping my head around all of the logistics and everything in regards to the handover and understanding new strategies that's at play in regarding for me to kind of lift off and spearhead the engagement and learning program. But to go kind of back to the beginning, I never actually had an interest in museums and galleries. My background's in music and in musical theater. That's what I was trained in through college and through university. That's what I went and been trained for. And so galleries and museums were never really in my frame of mind at the time when I kind of finished university. It was after when I was doing a project in Portsmouth, which is not far from where I live, that it was through that program where I was being trained to be a community advisor to help migrant women and their families integrate better within the Portsmouth community, whether it be through supporting them with ESOL classes, helping them deal with hate crime, or even simple things like doctor's appointments, and being able to help them through that process. It was me doing that project that I got this email saying there is this apprenticeship, not really an apprenticeship, but a traineeship from, at the time it was called cultural, it's still called Culture And, but before it was called SUCCLE, Strengthening Our Common Life. It was a diversity scheme, and Culture And was trying to solve the issue of the lack of diversity within the arts and heritage sector. And so I thought long and hard about it because I never saw myself in a museum and gallery, and wondered if it's something that best suit me. And so I applied for it, because with the project I was doing prior, what I hadn't known was that I was already kind of working within the idea of co-production, which later on became the idea of co-curation. And so what I hadn't recognized through that program, that I was already building the skills to kind of veer into museums and galleries and finding ways of engaging with communities, building relationships with them, and building strategic partnerships with local authorities and businesses to kind of further the idea of galleries and museum understanding their social responsibility and understanding what co-production was and how the community were able to be embedded in the legacy of an organization across all boards. And so that's kind of how I ended up in the sector, really, and kind of with my underlining practice being co-curation within any role that I kind of take on, and being able to further that practice through the role that I'm occupying now. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. That was a great intro, and I'm really interested in your background. And I hadn't realized that the co-production element was something that you were involved with before you got into museums. I know it was central to the first role that you talked about, and now, of course, in your new role, I'm sure it will be. But I hadn't realized that was the starting point for it. Before we go on, I should have just highlighted for our wider circle of colleagues in the room, if anyone has any questions or comments as we go along, please do, as Simon said, put them in the chat, and we'll make sure at the end of our talk, we've got about 15-20 minutes or so for this, and we'll make sure that there's time to come back and answer any queries or questions that you might have. So it sounds to me, Diana, just going back to your point, the Museums Change Lives flagship campaign, which is still so prominent in everything that we do, everything that guides us at the Museums Association, is something that might have attracted you to the organisation? Or was there something else when you saw the opportunity to become a trustee? What was it you wanted to often it's what people want to change about the sector, isn't it? Was there something specific you wanted to get involved with in joining the MA?
Interestingly enough, I knew about Museum Association prior to being a trustee. When I finished my traineeship, I was introduced to Museum Association through Museum Detox, I think, and was introduced to many of their campaigns. And I was kind of tracing them. I was reading reading the magazines and looking at how things were kind of playing out. What led me to apply to being a trustee is that I was thinking, if change is going to happen, I need to be in a space where that can take place. I had just previously left a trustee role that was they weren't really doing anything really much. It was almost just a namesake, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted to be a trustee, and if I was going to be a trustee, I wanted to understand and be able to operate with the responsibilities of what it takes to be one. And I wanted to be able to find a way of, wherever I could kind of participate, be able to have those conversations with people to create change based on what I was seeing in the sector. And so that's what really led me to kind of applying for it. And also at the time, Rachel Minot was on the board of trustees. And so I was very familiar with her work and was really appreciative of seeing how proactive the trustees were as well after talking to her. And so that's what got me to think, okay, let me go for this and see what happens.
Great. Okay. And of course, the main priorities of the association at the moment, as you're all too aware, are around the climate crisis. How do we address that as a sector? The anti-racism agenda, and I know very widely across cultural organisations, there's a move which was discussed at the Liverpool conference last year about the need to create an anti-racism strategy in museums. We have health and well-being, of course, and we have a focus on decolonisation guidance and practice in museums. And I'd like to come back to that specifically because you've had a lot of involvement and actually steered much of the work the MA has done on that to date. So before we do talk about that in a bit more detail, I wondered if you could say a little bit about the other priorities and anything that you feel is particularly important or that we have opportunities to really focus on over the next year or so for the MA, and maybe cite any local examples of museums in the Southwest that you're aware of who are doing good work in this area that we could all learn from.
Interestingly enough, I just left an organization that is part of a university. And so being in that atmosphere, it really brought forth the thoughts in regards to health and well-being, especially when you're considered a low-level staff member. What does that mean? But then also in the process of understanding your health and well-being, when is it okay for you as an employee to kind of set boundaries and to say no when you recognize that you may be taken for granted, or when you're in a distressing type of situation and you don't really have someone to be in your corner as you would have liked? What does that mean, and where can lower level staff go, that as it was called, to really be able to get that support? Those are one of the things that really stood out to me. And when is it okay for us to set boundaries as staff members that are lower than senior members to basically be able to advocate for yourself and your rights? I think there's this idea sometimes that just because you sign a contract that you throw away your rights in that process. And so is being able to reiterate those principles and policies, letting people who aren't deemed senior members of staff, how they can kind of navigate that type of atmosphere, and being able to do that in a way that doesn't cause retaliation or repercussions to where you feel like you feel silent or censored, and you don't really get to address the situation at hand. That's been one of the biggest learning curves for me, and realizing how people can navigate that and also wondering like how other organizations are dealing with that. I'm a part of Museum Detox, as you guys may be aware, and they are really open and honest with that forum about many of the things that they're going through. And one of the things that has been pointed out is that there isn't enough support for people who are deemed non-senior members of staff to really address those certain things without people taking offense to stuff when it comes to us coming forward and saying, hey, I don't appreciate the approach you may be taking with me. Can we have that conversation so we can move forward and better find a place on where you can support me, but not support me the way you think you need to support me, but really listen to me and understand where you can support me, as I know me better than you would do as a senior member of staff. And so those are the things that I've been noticing sometimes in some organizations. At the moment, I'm still struggling to find an organization that's being able to approach it in a manner where you see a good outcome. At the moment, I've been seeing people come out with negative impacts and a lot of trauma to deal with, and kind of finding ways of picking up whatever confidence they have left. And so I think those are one of the stark things that I've been noticing as well when it comes to that.
Okay, so there's a lot in there, and there's a couple of things running through my mind, Anna, while you're talking. I mean, obviously the focus on well-being at the MA at the moment is not just about wider sexual well-being or community well-being. It's starting looking inwards and thinking about staff, whole staff well-being as well. And it sounds like you feel there's quite a lot of mileage there. There's quite a lot to be done. I'm also thinking, as you're talking about the Sticks and Stones work, I know Tamsin's with us here today, and that was a big piece of research and a big piece of work, which I think by the sounds of it touches on a little bit of what you're saying about maybe a lack of respect or poor communication lines between managers and their direct reports, and the need to really review how those work and how those work for everybody, not just from the organizational perspective.
Absolutely, because what happens is what you're getting right now, especially with COVID, many museums and galleries are becoming more people-based. And so with that, they're looking to build relationships with external partners and with people. But in order for that work to really happen, we really need to question the relationships and dynamics that we have within our organization first, before we try to kind of create a relationship with the outer world. Because people who are coming in, they're going to notice those type of things sometimes, especially if they're in partnership with us. And so I think it's really important that everyone within the staff can be on the same page. That also includes being able to have uncomfortable conversations with your line manager if needed, and being able to see how both people can move forward. Tamsin has been really great at being able to put together the Sticks and Stones policies, and being able to have that conversation to pull together really great case studies. And I was really fortunate to be able to kind of talk to her about that, and being able to in some way to actually get some advice from her in that way. So if there's people who do have that situation within their workplace, being able to go to Museum Association website and looking at the Sticks and Stones research and what Tamsin has been doing when having this conversation. Also in particular last year when it was at the museum's conference as well, when kind of discussing these things, is a really good resource to go to hopefully help people navigate those type of situations.
Great, thank you, Diana. Before we talk about decolonization a little bit, can I pick up on something you and I have spoken about previously, which is, I think, another area of interest of yours, and it's around the potential for digital engagement, and particular the use of digital in the museum sector around storytelling and participatory practice, presumably. Is that something you can say a little bit more about?
Yeah, so the way I've approached it has been through radio. And so recently I just wrote and produced a resource for Culture 24 about how museums and galleries can connect with local radio stations in co-creation partnerships with local communities to further develop and introduce new stories to audiences who are listening during the day or while they're at home, and is being able to engage with different audiences from different demographics around your area. And so that's how I kind of approached the digital atmosphere of that, because a lot of the radio shows that I do also go on a digital platform on the website that people can go and listen to. My approach has been quite collaborative when it comes to interviewing people, or when it comes to telling stories in the community that are really important. And so how I've kind of gone about it is that if I, as the interviewer and producer of the show, interview someone, I ask for them to collaborate with me on creating the playlist and being able to co-curate that story together that also includes an interview that gives you a fuller picture. And so it made me think about how museums and galleries can further partner with their local radio stations, because they are looking for local partnerships. Slowly but surely, there are some organizations that are thinking about how they can connect with the music scene um, in their area. Like for me, also what I did is sometimes when we had artists that were exhibiting in the gallery space that I used to work in, I would approach the artist saying, hey, would you like to create a playlist that kind of further depicts the themes that you're wanting to communicate within your show? And then we would broadcast that out, and then people were able to have like this immersive experience that kind of furthered kind of immerse them into the idea of what's in the artist's mind and what they're trying to communicate and what exactly they're investigating.
I love that idea. It's the next step, isn't it? A more multisensory approach to any kind of presentation, really. So that's it's accessible, and it just adds that extra layer of enjoyment potentially, doesn't it? And ways to engage.
It does. And also it bridges the gap between the idea of representation, because one of the things I made mention of, for example, is the idea, for example, if you had like an artifact that was from Brazil, you may be able to talk about that artifact on radio with someone else who has that expertise in the area, but then you can further build representation when playing Brazilian music in a sense. So you're further developing that story and giving people a whole rounded idea in a way about what it is that's being talked about. And it makes it digestible as well, but also fun and fascinating for people. It's supposed to be like a fun process, but one that only engages with the people that you're in partnership with, but then also the listeners who potentially want to build a relationship with you or even engage with you in your organization.
Great. Thank you, Diana. I will take us back to where we were about to start off, and I'd love to get your reflections, not quite a year on, but a wee while after the decolonization guidance in museums has been published, about your time on the working group, which I know collaborated and worked closely with the ethics committee at the MA as well, didn't it? So I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about that experience, but also where you feel museums and the sector is more widely around tackling decolonization, and what the next steps might be.
Oh, that's a big one.
It's a big question.
Because decolonization is something that, and everyone knows, is that's been kind of brewing for such a long time. Interestingly enough, when I think back at my career, I started off with decolonizing, but didn't recognize that there was a word for it. Because my background when I did enter the sector, being at the National Museum of the Royal Navy, where they were talking about the abolition of the slave trade through the Royal Navy, they had artifacts that connected to the slave trade. And so for me, not knowing the word decolonization, I was like, can I take these artifacts out in a suitcase, bubble wrapped and everything and protected, and like wheel the suitcase around the city and being able to tell the stories and engage in really cool conversations with the public about it. So I was going to community centers, I was going to libraries, I was going to churches, I was going anywhere where anyone would like to have a conversation with me, which was great at hindsight because it helped build my confidence in talking, considering I'm a little bit of a hermit, but then also it allowed me to engage with people and see their perspective in regards to slavery, the empire, and what it meant for them in a contemporary society. And so I didn't know the word decolonizing for quite some time until later on in my career. And then once the word came about, I really thought about it, how it kind of connected with the co-creation process and what that meant. And how can we, in a sense, raise questions within your organization when it comes to your collection, or even if you don't have a collection, in regards to your institutions and being able to challenge the power that be when it comes to how you decide to function with people, in particularly Black, Brown, and people of color. What does that really mean? What does that mean when you have to contend with so much of the histories that tends to be swept under the rug here in Britain? And what does that mean for you as an organization, but mostly what it means for you as a person working inside that organization? What type of policies did you adopt? How are you engaging with collections? One of the things that I kind of had to research when I was first starting out in the industry was every time I saw a object, it always had the name of the person who looted it in the year, but I never really knew the story about that. And so I would go around asking like, what is the actual story? And all they can tell me, it was from Africa, and that was it. But I wanted to know more. And so I wanted to engage the co-creative process in decolonizing in order to kind of develop these type of stories and seeing where these things connected. And so decolonization, even when I didn't recognize it, has been a part of my journey in a way. But then also in principle and looking at the ethics of it, there was moments where I had to be aware of when decolonization was appropriate and when it wasn't. And I wasn't nervous of having that conversation because it's not something that needs to be in every setting. Not everything needs to be decolonized. And what I mean by that is that there's certain questions you have to ask. Does this need the decolonizing process or not? And so sometimes I would ask those questions, and I was okay with putting it to the side for a bit, because not in every project that was the main thing, or even when you're working with community groups, are they fully aware of what that means and if that's something they actually want to engage with. So it's also opening the conversation of the communities that you're partnering with, being able to have that choice if they want to engage in that process or not.
Mhm.
Mm.
And
So that's kind of the conversations that we were having when I did join the Decolonizing Steering Group.
okay.
Mm.
And just thinking about the situation now, the guidance has obviously been launched. It was
Yeah.
launched at conference last year.
Mm.
The MA has since progressed its plans for recruiting an officer who's going to be working with the sector on that, which is really exciting, but also working with funders around the UK to make sure that there are resources that are being produced to support people on that decolonisation journey wherever they feel they can enter in that discussion. And there's some work in the Museum's Essentials courses as well, isn't there? And really interesting, a leadership network that's going to be established, isn't there, as part of that? Have you got any details about that you can share, or what's your view on how important it is to have that leadership network set up, Deanna?
I think it's very important for leadership network to be set up, because every time when I've had the conversation in regards to decolonization, it's always been people who were deemed non-senior members of staff. You never really seen directors or senior members in the room really engaging in that conversation. And I remember, because I'm a part of the Contemporary Visual Arts Network, a CVAN. And we actually had this conversation about that, kind of connected to anti-racism, but also decolonizing when it comes to the institution. What were leaders' apprehension and nervousness about it? And they're feeling a lot of pressure in regards to it. And they're not really knowing how to approach it properly within their organization, and don't really find they can get the support needed in order to kind of have that conversation. They're also nervous about the pressures, because also in part of that has been Black Lives Matter, and what new policies will look like, how we're newly engaging with people because their approach is having to be changed. And so now there's some expectations that are wanting to be met, but they don't know where to start from, because at the moment, how it's being seen is that there's this very massive loaded thing that's happening, and it's not really being digested in small bite size to where they can take one day and one step at a time with it. And so sometimes I've had questions where I thought, or conversations where I thought, what is, and it's for lack of a better term, but we've had conversations about what is the small, quick, and dirty thing that can be done to kind of address certain things that can be immediately solved. And so some people were like, maybe we can expand our exhibitions program. We can expand the artists that we work with when it comes to engagement and learning program and the stories that we're wanting to develop. And so it's little things like that where you can see instantaneous change within your organization when you're deciding to develop those things and develop your knowledge in that area. And so I think it's really important that this network gets developed so they can find the support needed and being able to ask these questions and without judgment, and being able to see where they can get help to kind of alleviate some of the pressures that they're dealing with in order to kind of see where they can navigate really.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you very much, Diana. I'm conscious it's time is ticking on, and I'm just going to double check in the chat whether we've got any questions and actually open up the floor while I'm doing that to everybody in the virtual room. Please do shout literally if anyone has any questions for Diana or me about anything that we've been discussing. I don't see anything in the chat just now, but lots of useful links have been added. The Sticks and Stones information decolonisation guidance to, and an introduction to Roshi as well, the decolonisation programme officer. So thank you, colleagues, for that.
I will say that we are working with Roshi because there was a new new support group that's with Roshi working on the program and what that looks like. And so we are working towards that and being able to kind of partner with her on that as well. So when things start to kind of get up and running, please do check the website for that information.
Great, thank you, Diana. And I think people can express an interest in getting involved, can't they? There's a link that was emailed around, wasn't there, the members? Super. Okay, Diana, thank you for that insight. It's been really, really interesting to have this time to talk with you, and I hope it's been of interest to our colleagues in the virtual room. I'll hand back to Simon now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Diana and Gillian. That was great, highlighting lots of really interesting, important issues for us there. So now that's ended, we're going to go into breakout rooms for 10 minutes to share work that relates to Museums Change Lives, which Gillian mentioned, which is the MA's flagship policy. There'll be about 5 or 6 people in each breakout room. So it's an opportunity to, well, talk to people you might not have met, I suppose, in one sense, but also discuss in small groups how your museum or a museum you work with or a museum you visit, because I know not all of you will be working directly for one museum, to discuss how that museum is having a positive impact on communities, using their collections and buildings to do that. This might be through enhancing people's health and well-being or inspiring engagement, debate and reflection. It could be simply about creating better places to live or to work. And do choose someone to feedback if you'd like to share what you've been talking about. So Geraldine, if you could set up those breakout rooms now, that would be fabulous. Hopefully Geraldine's doing this.
I am, Simon.
Thanks. Thanks, Geraldine. I might just join one of the rooms, if that's all right.
Cool. There's not many people in
5.
5, yeah.
Yeah, I'll join that.
Cool. I'll just stay here just in case anything.
Just in case anyone, yeah. I think Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope that was interesting. I was part of a really good group that were talking about lots of different things. We talked a bit about a military museum project to support young people with sort of confidence and skills building and well-being, which is fantastic. A colleague then, somebody from English Heritage, talking about lots of different projects, you know, that English Heritage runs in terms of learning to do with gardening and women's refuges and lots of different things. So yeah, we had a really good conversation. Does anyone else want to share anything they covered? Can't see.
Our group was talking about social prescribing.
Ah, brilliant.
And a project that I was doing some learning from in Exeter called the All's Well Project. One of their big learnings from that project, is a lottery funded project, was that although the social prescribing model is designed to have referrals from GPs, that the vast majority of people who go and see their GP about their mental health are already too ill to be just given social prescribing. So they were finding that their participants were coming from much more informal word of mouth networks rather than the formal social prescribing program.
Yeah, oh, that's really interesting. So people who came to GPs, it was they should have been there. If they'd done something earlier, it would have been by that time it's too late, kind of thing. Yeah, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, social prescribing is interesting. I don't know a huge amount about it. It's something we've sort of tried to cover in Museums Journal occasionally. It's definitely an interesting area and a growing area, but obviously has complexity to it. Anyone else like to feedback on what the group was talking about?
Oh, well, I will. Hello.
Brilliant.
We were talking about how the cost of living crisis kind of impacts on people's decision makings about how they are able to spend their free time, and how our role in museums is to make our collections as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, and how that might impact on everything from the events that we're running to the admissions that we charge to the extra activities that we do, and how we might think of ways around combating that. And we just started talking about digital engagement and the pros and cons of digital engagement, but then we had to come back in here.
Yeah, we got cut off as well. Yeah, the cost of living crisis is a really interesting one, isn't it? It's really difficult to tell. I mean, obviously it's going to impact on visitors and their spending power and what they want to do. It's just, it seemed to have happened so quickly on the back of a pandemic. It's quite difficult to judge what the effect will be. Would that be fair to say, Laura?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unknowns for us at the moment. We're all in recovery mode, really, aren't we? So we're, you know, a lot of us are comparing what we're doing now to what we were doing in 2019, just to be able to benchmark. But we obviously still don't have those visitors back from abroad in the same way that we did before, and the travel trade just really isn't doing very much. And then on top of that, there's cost of living and how that's affecting individuals in the UK. So who knows what's going to happen?
What is your institution, Laura? I'd be interested as to acronyms on it.
Oh yeah, sorry, Clifton Suspension Bridge Trust.
Of course, right. I know, absolutely. Fantastic. A great place. Thanks for that, Laura. That's really interesting. Anyone else before we go on a quick break? No? Okay. Well, if that's everything, that was really interesting. I hope you enjoyed chatting in the groups. We've had time for about another sort of 10-minute break now. After that, we'll come back and we will have Tamsin Russell, our Workforce Development Officer, discussing the front of house Charter for Change. So I think we'll see everyone back at, say, 3:05, if that's all right. So you've got about 10 minutes to make a cup of tea and have some cake and do whatever else you want to do, and then we'll see everyone back here at 5:05. So welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a nice break. Sorry, probably a bit of a long break, actually. Over 10 minutes. I hope it was okay, but I hope it gave you a chance to have tea and stuff. The last one-day conference I did, I forgot one break completely, so I'm going from one extreme to the other. But anyway, we're still a bit early now, but Tamsin's ready, I think. So next up, we've got Tamsin, who's the Workforce Development Officer at the MA. Tamsin is going to be talking about the Front of House Charter for Change, which the MA has developed with the Front of House Museums Group. Tamsin hopefully is going to be joined by Abigail Godfrey, who is a co-founder of the Front of House Museums and is also an MA rep. And in this session, Tamsin, like I said, will be covering the Charter for Change and probably some other stuff as well. So welcome, Tamsin.
Welcome, lovely to see so many faces. Can everyone hear me? I've got headphones on. I can see, is that okay? Brilliant, nice. Thumbs up from Laura, thank you. So yeah, my colleague Abby Godfrey will be joining us also halfway through. So I'm going to sort of canter on, and when she comes in, I'll ask really for her opinion and reflections around different things as we get there. So welcome. If you haven't come across the Front of House Charter for Change, this is your great opportunity to find out more about it and what it means. And I was reflecting on what Diana was saying about the concept of well-being, and I certainly think, and you'll see well-being is one of the principles of practice. I don't think there's anything hugely revolutionary really in this document. For me, these seem to be like reasonable basic things that should be in place to support all colleagues that work and volunteer in the sector. But there was certainly, from our conversations with front of house colleagues, a need to articulate this, because for whatever reason, this isn't what is happening. And we've got lots of fairly shocking stories around how front of house workers are treated and colleagues are treated. So anyway, the Front of House Charter for Change was published on the 31st of March 2022. It's on our website. It is divided into a number of different parts, and we are, because it's not just a publication for one day in 1 year, we'll be adding new information to this and new resources. So every month we do something slightly different and add more information and resources to this page. So what am I going to go through today? I'm going to talk a little bit about the research aim, the methods we adopted and how we tested and developed the Charter. I'm then going to talk in detail about the Front of Charter of Change. I'm going to highlight the principles of practice. And once I've done that, you're going to go off into small breakout rooms for about 12 minutes, she says, to discuss this. So I'll give you a particular exercise that you're going to do. And then when you come back, what we'll do is talk a little bit more about it, and then also what that might look like in terms of how do we move this forward. I've worked in the sector for 22 years nearly, and what I know is that often organisations or sector bodies, whomever, do research into something, publish it, and then move on very, very quickly. One of the things we're committed to doing at the Museums Association is the research is the foundation for our next parts of work. So it doesn't all stop. We continue to layer, we continue to engage, we continue to have the conversation. So I'll be talking about that. So what were the project aims? We wanted to share with the sector some good examples of how front of house colleagues could be included and supported. We wanted also, very importantly, to ensure that the voice of front of house colleagues was heard. It's a specialism in its own right, and the role that front of house colleagues have with the visiting public, and that's a part of the broad umbrella term that we're using in terms of front of house colleagues. But we wanted to highlight that this is a specialism in its own right. The narrative we've had and the feedback we've had is often people, when talking to front of house colleagues, might be saying, and if there are any front of house individuals in the audience, I would love you to speak up. But often it's like, oh yes, so you've joined, yes, so what sort of role do you want to get into at the museum? As if working front of house and with our audiences and communities is a stepping stone. People choose to work with audiences and communities because that's where their talents lie, that's where their interest lies, and we wanted to make sure we reflected that. And we wanted to highlight the value and contribution of front of house colleagues' work. As an output, what we have is this charter, and it's on the website. But we've also created a template questionnaire so that we can, in our own organisation, do some subsequent research, but equally you could, in your organisation, do some subsequent research. We're going to be publishing a summary research report. We're going to be publishing case studies, an audit tool, and some how-tos. So just as I've said earlier, we're layering on additional support materials, because what we don't want is this piece of research to gather dust. And we really do hope that wherever possible, we increase the understanding of the experience of our colleagues that work front of house, increase their commitment for equity in terms of their treatment, and generally increase their experience of work. Because what we know is that front of house colleagues create the majority experience for in-person visits. So actually it's in all of our interests, not just being human beings. It's in all of our interests of ensuring that the people that are the face of the museum, where perhaps they have in the past been seen as being more on the edges, are brought to the core, front and centre, and we focus our attention on this. So what was the research? And don't worry, I'm not going to read through every single slide, but we did an 8-item questionnaire for a month in the summer of last year. We got a very good response rate. We got 344 responses, and this was open to members and also the sector more widely. As part of that really good response, we've got very rich data. And if I were to do this again, and we plan to as part of the evaluation, I would ensure that we have some more quantitative measures. So we've got a huge amount, pages and pages of Excel documents that we read all the way through. But it does make it hard for those people like those metrics to understand the actual experience of individuals working in museums, as opposed to me sort of sharing the data fully. So we asked these questions. These are 5 of the questions. We then analysed all of that information, and the project team, who I'll talk about very shortly, analysed this. So we all allocated a particular question, and we then would work out exactly how that evidence contributed to these themes. So we came up with these themes to begin with from looking at question 1, and then we carried on. So we've got lots of rich data. I don't think I can say this enough. What we then wanted to do was to test our current thinking with the sector more widely. So we hosted a museum hour, and we asked people to look at the research, to look at the themes that we'd identified, and to ask some quantitative questions that I'll come through to in a moment. So this is really important for the project, about keeping it live, keeping it moving. We really wanted to engage with people that for whatever reason may not have been able to engage previously. So in terms of the Museum Hour polls, we were really interested in exploring whether the themes we'd identified were important. Were they meaningful? We also wanted to double check about people's experience during the pandemic. And I think suffice to say it was patchy, really. So some front of house colleagues really highlighted the positive impacts of the pandemic. So they were redeployed, they potentially outside of their organisation if they work for a local authority, or they would have given new tasks that they wouldn't have been given before. They were given opportunities to do professional development that was always beyond their reach from an operational perspective. And also they felt that there was a much greater sense of belonging and inclusion. So where everyone was potentially working from home, where sites were closed, they were getting much greater level of information, sort of town hall meetings, as it were. And so rather than usually be the people that are, oh, you've got to be at your points before we open the doors, they were seen as being far more involved. That wasn't the case for everyone, is what I should say. The case for lots of front of house colleagues, where perhaps they were on furlough, was that they were not hugely engaged, certainly not engaged in any reopening plans, when potentially they would know the space best and how visitors use it, and often only being presented with new protocols and procedures the day before they got in. So treatment during the pandemic was patchy, some positives and some negatives. We also wanted to ask questions about the extent to which, if somebody was looking to apply for a job, would they be more excited about applying to an organisation that was signing up to the Charter for Change. We also asked them whether their intention to leave would increase or decrease as a function of the Charter for Change. So if their organisation embraced it. And then finally, we also asked them, to what extent would it have a positive impact on their performance? So if you knew your organisation was taking your well-being and your welfare seriously as a minimum, would that mean that you were more likely to go that extra mile? You're more likely to perform at a higher rate or a faster rate. Not a huge surprise, contracts, pay and recognition came out really, really strongly as part of the poll around the priorities. So we knew we needed to spend specific attention looking at those. There was a disconnect actually between the polls and the other research around the pandemic. And again, that just demonstrates to me it's so important not to just do those one window bits of research and really expand it as much as possible. We talked about, would you be more likely to apply for a role? And yes. Let me just have a look. What have I got? I can't see. So 86% of people said they'd be more likely to apply for an organisation if they'd signed up to the Charter. We also talked about being valued and would that affect their commitment? Yes, 98% of people said it would affect their commitment if they felt their organisation cared about them. And then also we looked at turnover rates if things didn't change. And I think that's really important. And I know we've got people here from a variety of different museums. Different sizes and scales, but the impact of staff turnover is significant. It's costly, it disrupts what we do, affects the service we deliver to our visitors and our communities. So really interesting research. We also then did some more testing. So we tested themes and recommendations in September with different groups of front of house colleagues, just to make sure the language was appropriate. So we got feedback, for example, that we shouldn't use the word could, we should use the word should. And so we had much discussion about that. There was feedback about the extent to which there was the use of the word workers as opposed to the use of the word colleagues. It was a really good process, as well as testing it with managers. And then once we pulled all of that together and then written everything, we tested it again with HR colleagues, front of house managers, and a couple of CEOs to see how it would land. What we're really conscious of is that organisational change often has to be supported, directed, and encouraged by those at the top of the organisation. Not always the case, but sometimes. So the front of house Charter for Change is now published. And in the recommendations, we have, for example, recommendations. So those for example recommendations is really to acknowledge that every organisation is different. There is no point publishing something and saying you all have to do this, because actually not everyone does. Some people are already there, and every organisation is different. Everyone is on a journey. What we want most of all is for individual organisations to identify where they are and what they might need to do. So as part of the website, we are looking certainly to learn from others and listen to others. There are 40 recommendations in the front of house Charter for Change, and we also will be having case studies around good practice. So the reason I'm labouring this point is I think there is a risk that the document lands or people think, oh my goodness, I must be doing all this. Now, we're certainly encouraging you to do this, but we're not being prescriptive in how you do it, because every organisation is different, every culture is different, the governance structures are different, your budgets are different, there are lots of different things. But what we're trying to do is give you a flavour of what these, for example, recommendations might include. So what were the headings? So we've got well-being. So we've put a definition in of well-being, and we've highlighted why we think it's important. And what I've just got underneath here are two of those, for example, recommendations. So front of house colleagues are supported when dealing with situations, for example, through policy, procedure, training and allyship. Physical well-being is prioritised, for example, finding space or access to water or to be seated. So a lot of the stories were, I'm being told that if I'm sitting down, that means I'm not alert, but I can sit down and be alert. I can get up very quickly. People talking about long shifts without access to water because water can't be on the galleries. Contracts and conditions were seen as being a really important part, and this was around making sure that we are rewarding our colleagues fairly. And so some of the recommendations here are around real living wage. Now, the reality of most hierarchies in the sector is that those individuals that are visitor service assistants, or whatever the terminology within the hierarchy, that they're most likely to be the lowest in the hierarchy, and therefore they're most likely to be lowest paid. So what does that look like? And how can we encourage, even if that hierarchy still exists, that individuals can survive and thrive on a wage that enables them not to have multiple jobs? Certainly there was feedback about the uncertainty about being a front of house colleague or in a front of house team, insofar as shifts that might be 5 over 7 were sometimes unpredictable. They didn't know when they were going to have to be in, certainly over the weekend. It meant it affected their own personal life and relationships because they couldn't plan, they couldn't do those sort of things. And there was much discussion around uniform and whether uniform is a good thing or a bad thing. And also just ensuring that where there is a uniform rule and that is a particular cost, that's then factored in. Hi, Abby. I'm just going through the different principles of practice. And so when I get to the end, what I'll do is to hand over to you so you can give a sort of brief synopsis of front of house museums and your role in all of this research. That's great. So contracts and conditions. Recognition was seen to be really, really important. I know, for example, having worked in a variety of museums, that sometimes actually having a uniform, whilst it may make you visible to visitors, often makes you invisible to colleagues. So I have been in a lift with front of house colleagues and someone else, and the person next to me will say hello to me but not acknowledge anyone else. That was felt as being really important, and that the skills and knowledge that front of house teams have is valued and recognised. You know, they are seeing how visitors react, use, operate in those spaces. If you're developing anything that has a front of house component, those are the individuals that often will have the most insight and also have opportunities to engage with individuals where perhaps more formal methods of visitor evaluation don't work as well. Inclusion was seen as being really important, and this was around making sure that we're not othering front of house colleagues. So where there is something that might be celebratory, how do we make sure it's a time of the day or time of the week where everyone can participate? There was also a sense that often, whilst organisations might adopt a cascade approach in terms of communication, what would be much better is that that timely information is shared, and having a work mail email address or access to the internet or intranet might be helpful. So inclusion, being part of the family rather than sort of a distant cousin, was felt to be really important. And professional development was something that was highlighted. Now, it's a really interesting proposition. You know, I said earlier that sometimes people make huge assumptions that you join a front of house team because it's just a way in to get to another part of the museum sector. Now, for some people, that is exactly the case. Other people, it's a job because it's good to go to. They love museums, and if they weren't doing here, they might be working somewhere else. And then there's another group, a third group, that are choosing absolutely specifically customer service, visitor operations, all of those things as a career in its own right, and working the way up. So when I'm talking about professional development, I think it's important to remember that we've sort of got these 3 different groups: those that have used it or want to use it as a springboard, those individuals that they come in, get their money, turn the light off at the end of the day and go home, and that's fine. And you've also got those individuals in the middle that are using this as for career progression around management, operational facilities, all of those sort of things. But some of the things that came out very clearly was just, I suppose, reflecting the operational side of things, making sure that people, where they were developing training programs or induction programs, ensured that individuals were able to be released, or if they came in to do them, they would be paid, so that, you know, things that, you know, I wouldn't think about as being somebody that is desk related. You know, if I need to go to a course, I can say I can go to this course, and that's not going to come back. I certainly wouldn't be going on courses if I'm not being paid them, if my organisation suggested I did go on a course. So again, there seems to be this sort of different standards between back of house colleagues and front of house colleagues. Now, for those of you that are also a back of house colleague like me, you might be thinking, but Tamsin, all of this looks amazing. Surely it could apply to me as well. Yes, it should. And that's why it's important to have these conversations. This is not about saying this is only going to be for front of house colleagues and teams. What we're trying to do is redress the balance where we know through our research that front of house colleagues and teams are treated differently and in lots of situations more negatively than those of us that are working back of house. So that's me giving you a talk through. Before we go into breakout rooms, I will just stop sharing just for a moment. And Abby, I don't know if you want to talk through or again, give your views, etc. and I'll stop talking.
Yes, hi, hello everyone. Lovely to see you all. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I, as well as being Southwest rep for the MA, I also co-founded Front of House Museums back in 2017 with my colleague Will Tregaskis. So we worked in partnership with the MA to form this Charter for Change. Part of what inspired it was kind of over the years of research that we did, particularly in our 29 survey, is that I mean, I guess we've been discussing the experience of working in front of house and the different types of treatment we've been receiving that's sort of reflected in our recommendations for the Charter. So for 2019, we found that 59% of front of house felt that they weren't valued by the sector, 63% felt they could not impact their museum's practices, and 52% could not see a future in the museum sector. And that's before we even went into COVID. So yeah, we were just very keen to get involved. We're really pleased with this charter. I think it's really incredible. Very grateful to the MA for supporting us with this. And yeah, it's just important to get the recognition. I very much share what Tamsin was saying in terms of how this reflects on the entirety of the sector. If you're identifying with kind of treatments and things and think that's how you should be treated, definitely. I think what's important about the Charter is not only is it an example of best practice that organisations can have, it's also a tool of self-advocacy. That's something that I personally you know, think is really important. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much, Abby. And there'll be times to ask Abby and myself some questions at the end, but we are going to move into the breakout rooms now. So we've got about 10 minutes or so. I've put the questions, the 3 questions, into the chat function, and we can then also put them and broadcast them into the rooms. So my colleague, Geraldine, is now going to put you into rooms. And what we want you to do is explore the Charter for Change and answer those 3 questions about what can you do, what can your team do, and what does your organisation do? Okay, over to you. I think everybody's coming back slowly but surely. Love to see you, Antonia. Hi, Antonia. So I'll be passing over to my colleague Antonia in the next 10 minutes or so. I just wanted to say thank you very much for having those conversations. We're not going to do feedback by deaf, okay? So I'm not going to get you all to come and share. I think there's a real utility in just listening and consolidating rather than repeating back. If you have got any amazing ideas or things you'd like to share, then yeah, let me know and I can share them on your behalf. I'm going to go back to my screen because I've got a few things to just to highlight. But I hope in your conversations you have had opportunities every time, opportunities to sort of explore what that might mean. I certainly know I've worked for organisations that have been patchy in terms of how they have talked to, sometimes in front of, never mind behind closed doors, front of house colleagues. So I think it's really important that just as we can with lots of other exclusory practices, if we can be allies, if we can be waving the flag, if we can be letting people have the space, if we can be inviting them in to a space where they haven't been invited in before, that's all within our reach, and we can do as much as we can do. And I also think that as soon as people doing things, I really truly believe in this concept of critical mass, is unless people see other people doing it, there'll always be a reason, often a red herring why they can't. Whereas if they begin to be challenged around what they could be doing themselves by seeing it in others, they're more likely to change their behaviour. So part of that is about living the principles. So strangely enough, we lived these principles before we got them. So in terms of this project, we were always really clear that this was going to be a collaboration, a clear partnership with front of house museum. So it's great that Abby is here, and that the people we wanted to be on the project team, and we did a call out. We said, does anyone want to be on, do anything to do with this work? And actually I got another email today that someone said, oh, I've just seen it, can I be involved? We just wanted people that wanted to make that change to be involved, and we wanted people that had lived experience to be able to say, this is what's happened to me, this is what might work, this might not. Because, you know, with the greatest will in the world, I've not worked even on a front of house event for 20 years since I first joined the sector. So that's not my recent experience. We also wanted to make sure that we were recognising people, really conscious that sometimes you might give up your time to do extra role activities because it's told it's important either for your career or others, but then there's still no recognition. So we have a meet the team page with the individuals that were involved in this process, and they will be supporting the rollout of this. So at every conference, every museum's members meeting, we'll be inviting those individuals to share the space. This is our first one, so we're finding our feet at the moment. We also wanted to be very focused on individuals' well-being, so there was a flexibility of contribution. So some people were far more heavily involved, other people weren't. We've not put that as part of the hierarchy of recognition because everyone gave what they could at the time, and that was absolutely fine. We tried to put meetings in the evening, so this was voluntary work. There wasn't a budget associated, and that's something we would look to do potentially differently next time. The meetings in the evening wherever possible to ensure that people got a chance, and sometimes multiple meetings. If not every member of the group could attend, we'd run one or two so that we would still hear the same thing, we'd still get the information back, and that's really important. And also just from a professional development perspective, you know, whilst we didn't, and again, this is something I would do differently working in this way in the future, didn't say, this is how it's going to develop you, because obviously that wouldn't be the right thing to do anyway. But what I think I would have liked to have done is said, you know, how can we utilise your existing talents, or are there any needs that you would like to develop? I didn't do that. But that is something I would do in the future as a function of this research and the reflections about what worked and what didn't work. But certainly individuals ended up looking at analysis of data, proofing documents and presenting. So there are things that perhaps might have been out with the tasks or activities we might see for a front of house colleague that they've been able to gain from participating. I think that's a really important thing, but I think I probably could have done that better at the beginning. So what are the next steps? So please, please, please read the Charter for Change from beginning to end. There is going to be a 2-page PDF published at the end of the month. So for those of you that have got other people that won't read the whole thing, there will be that coming your way very shortly. And just begin to think about how we embed this and what we can do in terms of enriching roles and what we can do to help people have greater experiences as part of their role. It's on the website. Signpost it to others, engage with front of house museums, engage in line with our implementation plan. So we have got a 12-month implementation plan where we're putting new things in place. So there'll be case studies coming on, audit documents. We have template presentations with all of the data in, so that if you wanted then just to take the presentation and then run with it in your own department or team, then you could do that. I mean, certainly you can invite us to come and present as well. I'm sure we would love to do that. We will be posting some workshops online shortly. And certainly if you are coming to conference, there is a dedicated session all about this and more. So a big thanks to Will, who can't be here today, and to Abby, who is here today from the front of house museums. Visit their website, follow them on Twitter. They've done some amazing work, continue to do amazing work, and certainly have been a really important part of this collaboration, this partnership. So that's where I'm sort of going to end, I think. Yes, talking about the front of house Charter for Change, but just I've got 2 more slides around other things, because it's never quiet in the Museums Association. So just to really very, very briefly, what's happening at the moment? So workforce and professional development 2022 to 2023. For those of you that are individual members, I've still got availability for 1 hour career conversations. So that's an hour's slot with me talking about your career aspirations and what next. We've already talked about the decolonising work, and Roshi, our new team member, who's developing the decolonising skills and confidence programme. So watch this space about that. In the autumn, we're going to be launching an MA mentoring programme. So I know I've got a few AMAs in the audience. I think I've also got a couple of FMAs in the audience as well. But this is a programme that sits between both of those. So this is about you getting access to individual mentoring to support your next steps. I also know there's a few AMA alumni in the audience. This might be right up your street. Museum Essentials, we've just recently published the Museum Essentials around supporting anti-racism. That's a fantastic resource that Antonio has worked on. And we have got 2 more Museum Essentials in development, one around decolonising and supporting decolonising practice, and one about the climate crisis. So watch this space. We have got the green light to proceed with the salary survey. So those of you that have been MA members for a wee while, you'll know that we last published our salary guidance. I think it was March 2017, so a wee while ago. We took a pause because of the pandemic, because we felt there was too much going on and actually too much variability. We feel that we're in a position where we can now move forward and get good data. So that's also coming along this year. And then there's a new competency framework. What's a competency framework, I hear you cry? So a competency framework is an overarching and integrated framework that we're developing to support the AMA and the FMA and everything else to do with professional development. A competency is defined as skills, knowledge and experience that when combined, basically deliver professional competence. We have gone back to a blank sheet of paper, ultimately, to develop this. So everything is values-based. We put the values at the heart of everything we do at the Museums Association, and we feel the values around participation, sustainability, ethics and inclusion are important values to guide the sector generally. What the framework hopefully does is create a common language so that we can discuss within the MA and we can discuss with you as members what your professional development needs are. And we've developed a framework that's got 6 competencies, 4 competency levels, and 100 competency statements. Whoop, whoop. And how will you use that? So the headings are outlined here: leading and change making, sustaining relationships and partnerships, developing self and others, developing empowering collections, engaging audiences and communities, and managing people and money. If you've got a better idea for managing people and money, we are open to suggestions. The competency framework is about having that language. It will help you as a member assess your current competence by enabling you to do a strengths analysis. It will help you focus your attention on what your own personal development needs are and what the opportunities are at the MA. And we are shifting very clearly to a far more modular approach. So for all of the activities that we do, including Museum Essentials, one-day events, we'll be signposting those to our competency framework and vice versa. And as part of that, we're encouraging everybody to take ownership of their professional development and to start recording and reflecting on their professional development and having a sense of how much time they've invested in themselves through CPD hours. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, primarily around front of house Charter for Change. I'm conscious of time, Abby, so I'm not going to be able to bring you back in, but you are in the space. I will now hand over back to Simon, but if you've got any questions about anything that I've covered at all, then please let me know. And if it's about front of house Charter for Change, then you can also contact Abby. So I'm going to stop sharing my presentation and just hand over exactly 5 to 4. Boom. All right. Thank you so much, people.
Amazing, Tamsin. Yeah, we're actually back on track. Bang on. That's fantastic. So next, that was a really great session, Tamsin. Really good conversation in my group, and I hope the other groups are the same. Next up, we've got a session on an interactive session on sustainability skills, and that's led by Antonia, who's our policy and campaigns officer. So over to you, Antonia.
Everyone, really great to be here with you all. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Yes. So hi, my name's Antonia. I'm Policy and Campaigns Officer at the Museums Association. This session is a chance really for us to get inspired about taking action for the climate crisis, for sustainability, for creating change in this area. I'm going to start by sharing some of the work we're doing at the Museums Association around tackling the climate crisis. I'm then going to hand over to Katie England from Salisbury Museum, who's going to share some of the work they're doing around tackling the climate crisis and sustainability. And then we'll have time at the end to go into breakout groups and just discuss ideas, hear from each other the work that you're doing around this, things that you'd like to do in the future. So I'll get started by sharing some of the work we're doing at the MA. We're really committed to working with museums across the UK so that all museums can play our part in tackling the climate crisis. It's something we've been working on for a number of years, and I'm just going to sort of do a bit of a highlights of some of the key moments in this work for us and what we've got coming up. So in April 2019, we took part in the Culture Declares Emergency campaign, where we, along with 190 UK institutions and individuals from across the arts and cultural sector, signed up to this pledge. It was a really sort of key moment, I think, in the arts and cultural sector coming together to build momentum around creating change and also bring some profile to taking action for the climate and the climate emergency. We've also really been sort of working to inspire change and share ideas around activism for the climate through lots of our events and conferences. So a couple of moments highlighted on this slide are from our Brighton conference in 2019, where we had keynote speeches from Clayton Thomas Muller, who's pictured on the left, who's a campaigner for Indigenous rights and environmental and economic justice. We also had a keynote from Farhana Yamin, climate activist and environmental lawyer. So we've really been sort of trying to use our channels and platforms to get ideas and discussion around creating change for the climate in the work that we do. 2019 was also a year where we added a one-off sustainability award to our Museum Change Lives Awards. Again, just looking to sort of recognise the work that's already happening in the sector to create change in this area. We also have been working to build action for the climate and ecology into our advocacy work. So the work we do around representing the needs of the sector and working with key partners on the most important issues. And an example of this is that we joined with Julie's Bicycle in calling for a just and green recovery from the COVID-19 crisis in June 2020. So I think this is an example where we're looking to really kind of connect up the work we're doing, say, for instance, around recovery and growth in the sector to things like climate change and a just and green recovery in this case. And a lot of this work has really built up to a really exciting moment for us at the Museums Association, which was last October. Sarah Kassam joined us as our first climate champion trustee. We've been doing work around this area, but I think we recognised that we really needed more kind of leadership and expertise and energy behind the work we wanted to do with museums on this. And Sarah joining as a trustee has really given us a strong boost in that respect. Sarah was the first sustainability lead at V&A London, and she's worked in sustainability across a range of sectors. She's playing a really key part in our work and our commitment to supporting the sector in taking action. And so a lot of that work has led us to this moment where we're looking to renew and actually sort of relaunch our campaign work around the climate crisis. And a sort of shift that we're taking is really thinking more about climate justice and ecological justice. So thinking about climate change, but also nature and sustainability in quite a holistic way, and thinking about this in terms of justice, social impact, wanting to kind of create that momentum, but also use this as a kind of hopeful campaign, because I think it can be easy when you're thinking about climate crisis. I mean, it's there in the word, isn't it, crisis, to feel quite overwhelmed, unsure of where to start. And we really want to bring hope and energy to this work as well. So I just wanted to share some of our campaign aims for this work as we move into relaunching the campaign. So these first three aims are around what we want to do in our work supporting museums. So we want to support museums to be able to raise awareness using collections, programs, exhibitions, learning and engagement to discuss climate and ecological issues and encourage audiences and communities to take action. We want to work with museums to champion change, and we really see that as happening by working with all partners, across the board to implement regenerative policies in, local areas where museums are based. And then this last aim is around being the change, so sort of working with museums to really embed climate action across all decision making and work, and also doing that work around making sure an organisation's footprint is as low as it can go, committing to targets, publishing data, really sort of embedding this work in the everyday running of a museum. We've also got then these further three aims, which are so those first three aims are sort of how we want to work with museums, and these next set of aims are what we at the Museum Association are committing to doing in terms of our work. So we are committing to advocating on behalf of the sector to increase resources around this work and facilitate partnership working on climate and ecological issues. We see that's something we can really bring value to. We also are committed to continuing to reduce our climate impact by further implementing our carbon reduction plan. And finally, just as we're sort of wanting to work with museums to embed climate action in the work of museums, we at the Museum Association want to embed climate activism across all of the work we do. So across all of our campaigns and activities, working to really take an intersectional approach so that this work is still focused on social justice, on social impact, and connects into all of our work in those areas. So just a link here where you can find out more about the work we're doing and what we've got planned. And I'll make sure I share that in the chat as well. But I am now going to stop sharing and hand over and welcome Katie, who I know has been part of the session this afternoon, just to hear more about the work that's happening at Salisbury and a project that's just getting started. So over to you, Katie.
Brilliant, thanks, Antonia. So I want to talk to you today about a project that we've just started at the Salisbury Museum called Fashioning Our World, which aims to explore historic fashion collections to inspire a more sustainable future. But before I talk about that project, I just want to put it in context and tell you a little bit about how it came about. So at Salisbury Museum, we've been developing the work that we've been doing with young people for about the last 6 years. We started small, gradually building up a programme of workshops. and after school clubs for young people. And it was through these workshops that we noticed the young people were really interested in our fashion collection. Although they didn't like the way we displayed our fashion at that time. I think the number one word they used to describe it was creepy. So what we wanted to do was work with the young people on a co-curation project to redisplay our fashion collection at the museum. And that project we called Look Again, and it was funded by the Museums Association Esme Fairbairn Collections Fund. So the young people taking part in that project worked with volunteers, experts and the staff team to explore ideas and themes for the gallery. They worked on the design and the panels and also creating replicas. That project was paused for the pandemic. And when it was paused, we started a blog to keep in touch with the project team. Mainly to stop we didn't want our volunteers to feel isolated and to keep in touch with the young people. And that proved so successful, we ended up using the contributions to that blog as part of the digital resource for the new gallery, which was a result of that project. And the reason I wanted to tell you about the Look Again project and the development of which led to the new fashion gallery at the museum was because it is through that project and the work with young people that we did on that, which has led to our new project, Fashioning Our World. So one of the themes that the young people really wanted to explore in our fashion gallery was sustainability. And through their contributions to the gallery and the contributions to the blog, it was clear that they were really, although they love fashion, they were really concerned about fast fashion and its impact on the environment. And they were really keen to do something about it. So when we got to the end of the Look Again project and the gallery was done, we discussed the theme of sustainability and the young people's ideas. And we also talked to volunteers who were involved in that project and some of the team of experts. And that is what led to the idea of the Fashioning Our World project. So it kind of was a direct result of the work that we did on the previous project. So the idea of the Fashioning Our World project is to, again, work with young people and explore museum fashion collections, starting with a focus on the Salisbury Museum collection, and what we can learn, what stories they can tell us about sustainability. So it obviously could be positive stories such as reuse, repurposing and repair, or the more negative aspects like the use of unsustainable materials and whether that has changed and whether we have alternatives and what we can do about it. And through this, we are hoping that through learning about these stories of sustainability as part of the project, the young people will be inspired to help others make positive changes towards sustainable fashion in the future. So for the Fashioning Our World project, we are aiming to work with young people from the local area and also young carers, as well as some university students, to put together a series of workshops. At the workshops, the young people will be able to come to the museum and work with the objects in our fashion collection. And through working with those objects, be able to learn the stories they tell and get a really good understanding of them through working with the objects themselves. And what we are hoping is through learning about these stories that our collection can tell, the young people will start to think differently about their own clothes and wardrobes and the stories that their clothes can tell in terms of when they've been worn and if they're a garment they've had for a long time. And once they hopefully start to look at their clothes and wardrobes differently, we, as part of the project, are aiming to teach them practical skills. So work with textile experts so the young people can gain practical skills in terms of visible mending, patching, repairing, repurposing their own clothes. So they can actually try out some of the practical skills that they might have been learning about in the stories about the objects. And the third element of the workshops will be for the young people taking part in the project to share their knowledge and skills in some way with the community. So this will be led by the young people. So we don't know at the moment how they would choose to do that. And I'm sure, well, I'm very excited to see what kind of ideas the young people will come up with. But whatever ideas they have, we will support them through the museum staff team and volunteers and experts that we work with to enable them to realise their ideas and hopefully get out into the community and change other people's attitudes. We are aiming to work with local businesses as well as part of the project. So one local business we've been talking to is Foxtrot Vintage, which is the vintage clothes shop in Salisbury. And we're also aiming to work with other organisations such as Sustainable Fashion Week to bring in those key skills in terms of the knowledge about sustainable fashion. So what we're aiming to do through these workshops is create a model that can be used for other museums with fashion collections who'd like to work with young people in a similar way. At Salisbury Museum, we feel like we're in a good position to be able to do this because we're part of the Wessex Museums Partnership, which is Salisbury Museum, Dorset Museum, Poole Museum and Wiltshire Museum. And so we're already used to working in collaboration with the other museums in that partnership. So that puts us in a good position. And in the second year of the project, we'll be working with Dorset Museum, who also have an extensive historic collection of historic clothes and textiles. So we're working with Dorset and we aim to trial the model which we've put together in year one at the Salisbury Museum to see if it works in another museum setting. So we are aiming for the digital to be a core part of the project from the beginning. And I mentioned earlier that in our previous project, we had a digital aspect to the project, which was created by young people and volunteers working with the fashion collection. And for the Fashioning Our World project, we're aiming to build on that digital resource and repurpose that, which fits in nicely with the theme of the project, and extend it to this project as well. So people who access that digital resource can see the kind of journey that we've been on to get to where we are at the moment. So the Fashioning Our World project, we really want it to be a call to positive action. There are a lot of very scary statistics out there about the impact of fast fashion on the planet. But with this project, we really want to focus on positive action and what the young people working on the project can learn from the stories that the historical fashion collections at Salisbury Museum and hopefully other museums can tell and equip them with the skills, and then ultimately enable them to have a positive impact on fashion sustainability in the future and inspire others in the community to have a positive impact. And then ultimately, we're aiming to create something that's useful to other museums and heritage organisations, so they're able to work with their collections in a similar way and can use the skills and knowledge that we've built up through working on this project and the previous project to inspire more young people to make positive changes to fashion sustainability.
That's great. Thank you so much, Katie. Really, really interesting to hear more about that project and the work you did to get there. Before we go into breakout rooms, I think we've got time if anybody's got any questions for Katie about that work, any reflections that came up for you. Feel free to pop them in the chat or unmute and ask. I had one actually, if no one else can jump in, which was that, so you kind of had that first co-curation project you did with the young people, and that's where the kind of sustainability passion kind of came from. So have you got some of those same young people joining this project, as well as like working with a newer group of young people? I was just interested in the connection there.
We are aiming to work with new groups of young people, but I have to say I did have one of the young people from the previous project only email me last week. She went off to university in September at the end of the last project, and she did email me and say, I'm back for the summer, I'm really keen to be involved with your new project. So so it'll be great to have that little, you know, to have some continuity there, but we are also looking to work with some new groups as well, so a bit of both really.
That's great, thanks. I think we've just had a question in from Helen actually, which is, how did you recruit the group?
Because I'm right at the start of this project now, so I've literally only been doing it a couple of weeks, haven't got to do any recruitment. When I was working on the last project, I did a lot of assemblies with local secondary schools, and I found that to be a good way of recruiting the young people. You know, it enables you to kind of make a bit of a connection with the young people themselves, and you know, give them the opportunity to come and chat with you at the end. And I found that was quite successful in that the young people felt like they'd chosen themselves to be involved in the project rather than kind of directed by a school or parents or other adults. So that worked really well for us when we were recruiting for the last project.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, or are we ready to get chatting? Great, well, really big thanks again, Katie, for sharing work on that project. I just think it's really brilliant to hear from, you know, someone who's already doing the work, and it sounds really inspiring what you're doing with that group of young people as well. So to round off this session, we're going to go into breakout rooms. And this is really just a chance for us to kind of talk in smaller groups. And the two sort of prompts to kind of aid the discussion are, what are you already doing around sustainability and tackling the climate crisis in your museum? And the other prompt is, you know, what are your ideas for what you could do next? You know, what's your kind of ambitions or on your wish list of things you could get into around this area? So I will pop those in the chat just so that we've got them. And we'll go into breakout groups just to, just share some ideas. Great, I think that's most people back from the breakout room. So I just want to say thank you for taking part and, you know, getting involved in those discussions. I certainly had a really interesting one in the room I was part of. And just thanks again for Katie for coming to talk about your project. I think there's a lot of excitement to hear how that goes. You have to keep us all posted. Great, and I will hand back to Simon.
Thanks so much, Antonia. So now we've reached the end of the meeting. There's anything else that anyone would like to share with the group? But I really hope you enjoyed the event, and thanks for coming. Please do feedback what you thought of the event. Really want to learn and improve what we offer. I think there will be an evaluation form sent out, so if you get the time to fill it out, that'd be great. I don't think it's that long. Just a quick reminder, our next online event is the all-inclusive one about championing accessible museums on 26th of May. Also, don't forget the MA conference in Edinburgh. It'd be lovely to see you there, obviously getting there by train and other sustainable means. And there's obviously more details on how to book on the MA website. And just a reminder, the MA website is a place to go for all the other stuff, the funding we offer, our campaigns and our professional development offer. So thanks so much to all the speakers. It's been fantastic. And then thanks very much, lastly, for everyone for attending. I hope you enjoyed the event. Bye all, see you.